Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto took the path of becoming a puppeteer. Young Naruto is prohibited from being ninja of the leaf. Left to his own devices, he takes an unusual path to power as a puppeteer. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 9. Taro had his genin kamen collected by 5 the next morning. He signaled that they were leaving to eat. Naruto had them in a deserted training ground 5 minutes later. He pulled out a small scroll and unsealed a massive quantity of food. He pushed a reasonable quantity of food off the sealing scroll and then collapsed the storage seal again. Eat. It may be the last normal meal you have in some time, Taro said. None of the genin objected. None of them spoke until the food was gone. They had all been trained to take food when it was offered, to take sleep whenever possible. Their questions could wait. Taro ate little and started speaking once number 3 finished eating. I have not heard about any cancellations, so I have to assume that the decrepit Hokage did nothing with my warning. They may have people patrolling the exam area, but it would take a large group of trained ninja, or a group with highly complementary skills, like you three, to even budge a Sunin who didn't want to leave. Thinking back over the situation yesterday, you were lucky that the Sunin didn't pull out his major techniques. He must have been trying to be subtle with his infiltration. Inside that forest, or in other places, who knows? Whatever happens is not going to be anything good. He could pull out a technique strong enough to burn a quarter of that forest, I have no doubt. Or he could summon Manda, the boss snake. The damage that particular summon could inflict would be massive. We were lucky yesterday. He underestimated you once, he won't do it again. Okay? Warning over. The three shared looks. What should we do, number 4, if he returns? Number 1 asked. The risk is low you'll run into him again. His plan, whatever it is bigger than 3 genin from grass. So, try to ignore this threat for now. Strike fast, strike hard, hamstring everyone you come across. But, if you come across anyone with the feel of Orochimaru's chakra, flee. I had hoped this wouldn't be necessary, but it seems it is. Taro reached into one of his pockets and pulled out 3 small carved blocks of wood. He handed a rhinoceros sculpture to number 1, a wolf sculpture to number 2, and dragon sculpture to number 3. These are of my creation. In a dire emergency, channel chakra, as much as you can spare, into these. The more chakra you pour into it, the larger and more powerful these guardians become. Number 3 looked confused. Is this a summon animal? Taro shook his head. No, this is an autonomous puppet that expands and activates when you channel chakra into it. It will follow simple instructions from the one who activated it. It was inspired by summoned creatures, but it doesn't require a contract. Number 2 turned her sculpture over and over. How big will it get? Taro looked up and saw it was still an hour until daybreak. I have another in my pocket. Why don't I show you? Taro pulled out a carved statue of an orangutan and channeled his chakra into it. As it began to expand, he threw it 30 feet away at the edge of the clearing. 15 seconds later it stopped growing. It was easily as tall as the tallest trees, more than 30 meters tall. The orangutan had long, razor-sharp claws and its face looked angry, terrifying, with a mouth full of teeth. Taro looked up and yelled, "Attack that tree!" He pointed. A second later the tree was uprooted and being used as a toothpick in the construct's mouth. The genin were shocked into silence, but not for long. Number 1 got in the first question, how hard is it to damage? Taro smiled. A determined S-class opponent could take it down in a few minutes, maybe 6 or 8. Attacking tiny ninja isn't the strength of these creatures, though. I'm giving them to you more to protect you from giant summons. Orochimaru is known for using summon animals in many of his techniques. The rest of the morning passed in training and discussions regarding how best to handle the Forest of Death. Taro had heard several hints from Konoha-Jonin about this segment. The fools couldn't keep their lips shut even during a test. Taro walked his students to the test beginning. They didn't notice it, but he left a few hundred micro-puppets scattered on his students. Half of them were loaded with chakra poison seals, the other half were loaded with a paralysis solution. Such an arsenal could give his students a needed advantage in an ambush. He left his genin at the staging area. He would be tracking their progress through his micro-puppets. High levels of chakra in an area vibrated right down the chakra strings, like a primitive form of communication. Taro had prepared them and equipped them with emergency protections. They would do well. Taro had to ponder the bigger issues. What exactly was going on in this stupid village? Security had always been relaxed. After all, Naruto had escaped at the age of 8 and returned without notice at age 9. But not to notice a Sunin entering the village, not to up the readiness of the ninja corps when foreigners were in town. Did they want to be invaded and conquered? It certainly seemed like dereliction of duty. It didn't take long for Taro to find where some of the other jonin were waiting out the second exam, a dive bar near to the largest ninja store in Konoha. Taro took in the various Hitaites. Only a couple from Konoha, Rain had a few, Suna had one, a few of the smaller villages, like Waterfall and T, and one was a musical note, which Taro didn't recognize. The one wearing the note scowled at Taro before schooling his expression. Interesting. Taro ordered a beer and sat down. He was going to get a reading of the room. It didn't take long. The Sunajonin walked over to Taro's table and sat down. "I hear you're one tough son of a bitch," the Jonin stated. Taro laughed. "Bunch of gossipy old women, instead of ninjas. About damn right. I'm called Paku, sensei to the most ragtag group of genin I've ever seen. I'm Taro of the river. My students will do well." Paku swallowed some beer and then smirked. "Tell me, is it true you ran into a certain snake-like man yesterday?" Taro raised his bottle and smiled. "I see. I'd be real curious how a guy like you can drive off someone like Orochimaru." Taro realized this was more than idle gossip now. The man was fishing for a reason. He had the slightest tone of desperation about him. Taro began to open his mouth to respond, when he felt vibrations of a sort come down his chakra strings. His genin were nearing something unnatural. He took direct control of a dozen micro-puppets that flew out of the clothing they were hiding in. 100 meters away, the Suna genin team, or their smallest teammate, was destroying another team. A bloodbath. The chakra was wrong. It was demonic and it came from the small ninja. What was it? As Naruto watched more and more of the horror, he had an awful realization. The redhead was Jinchuriki. Not only that, he was directly accessing demonic chakra and skills. A shiver went down Naruto's back. Suna had brought an undeclared demon container. They were up to something. The way this jonin was unsubtle, probing for information. Curious, disturbing. If such a thing did happen, you'll have to read about when I finally get around to publishing my memoirs. Taro smiled. Paku laughed. Very few ninja lived old enough to sit down and write memoirs. I like you, grass guy. You tell your genin how to get through the forest. No. I didn't get a copy of the plans. Did Konoha hand those out? A shake of the head. Just to their jonin, it sounds like. Well, cheating is a tradition, isn't it? Paku finished off his drink and stood up. The only ones who yell about cheating are the losers. Taro nodded and tilted his beer back. I'll drink to that. Chapter 10. Taro's 3 genin came across one of the teams from Rain 30 minutes after entering the Forest of Death. They seemed not to notice the grass team as they began a watch. The team exchanged hand seals as they debated a plan. Number 2 was in favor of spilling a little blood. However, it was number 3, the steam user, who suggested something more subtle, and far less likely to give away their position in the forest. Number 1 laid a genjutsu to keep the rain ninja wandering in circles. That was fun to watch. Number 2 mixed up a mild hallucinogenic poison that would take a week or longer to exit their systems. She looked a bit cross that she wouldn't be allowed to cause anyone's arm to rot off or anyone's appendix to burst. Number 3 collected the sealed poison vial from number 2 and gave the kunoichi a hard look. He just hoped that she hadn't prepared a distillation of sarin or something equally lethal to spite numbers 1 and 3. After finally deciding the poison was what they had asked for, Number 3 timed his throw and sent the vial high into the air, a high arcing curve designed to put the vial over its 3 targets. When it was just a few feet above all 3 of the Rain Ninja, Number 3 sent a small focused blast of steam. The vial cracked and rained down the poison. Within moments, one hit the ground shaking. The other started attacking each other. They were simple to disarm and incapacitate using nerve clusters after that. The grass genin threw tree branches over their still breathing victims and counted it as a success. It was easier than going fishing with a stack of exploding notes. They'd been given a heaven scroll before the gates to this exam begun. With this attack, they recovered an earth scroll 40 minutes into the exam. It was good. They looked forward to discussing the operation in the after-action conference with Number 4. The only thing he could scold them for was putting together the plan too slowly and arguing too much about it. Now the question was, what next? A few hand signals between Taro's genin settled the question, end the test or continue. They'd remain in the forest a bit longer, deal with a few other competitors, gauge up the people who might actually be tough. Number 1 led them deeper into the forest, knowing that a team from Waterfall had entered not too far from where he and 2 and 3 had entered. Unfortunately for that plan, the lone team from Sand was already slaughtering the easy marks from Waterfall, slaughtering, literally. The short redhead had total control of Sand and a total lack of sanity. The genin stayed hidden until well after the Suna genin passed away. With hand seals, they compared notes. Number 1, red boy on a whole other level. Would steam hurt him? 3. Number 3, don't want to find out. Girl was wind user. Could push steam back in my face. Number 2, my jutsu go through wind fine. Number 4 has tested extensively. Number 3, what about painted boy? Number 1, curious bundle on back. Maybe puppet user who hasn't learned any storage ceiling? Number 4 lectured on strengths and weaknesses. Likely into deception and hiding. Number 2, let's get away from redhead now. Don't want to see that desert funeral thing again. The trio encountered 3 more teams, and trapped their minds and poisoned them without ever being detected. They sealed the unneeded scrolls they recovered into leaves or other forest detritus. It was a standard battle tactic, at least standard as far as their teacher had instructed them, denial and destruction of critical resources. They were beginning to think about heading for the tower when they felt more of the chakra from the cemetery, the snake sunin's chakra. This time it wasn't a little bit, the ninja was throwing around some massive techniques. He had come into the forest then, even after Number 4 had warned the Konoha officials. Number 4 had been right so far, and that the Sunin hadn't come to see them again. What was he here for, during a test of simple genin? None knew. All 3 would admit to at least being nervous. None would own up to feeling sheer terror. Number 2, Number 4 was right. These people are fools. Train up powerful shinobi without regard to whether they're at all sane. Number 1, don't need a lecture. 2. Need a plan. Stay in forest overnight or head to tower. Number 3, I don't care to face that freak again. He's throwing around chakra now that would take us down in seconds. We survived yesterday because he was trying to be sneaky. Number 2, fine. Tower, here we come. They encountered only a single additional team in the forest on their way to the central building. The Alkanoichi team from T-Country was poisoned without incident, their scroll sealed and hidden. They arrived safely just after midnight. They unsealed their scrolls and were greeted by a leaf chinin moments later. They stopped on the way to their quarters only to grab food. As they got to their quarters they noticed the nameplate on the next suite over, Hidden Sand. It was going to be a long 4 days trapped with those loonies from Suna. Taro thought about going to sleep after he felt his team reach safety in the tower. But he couldn't get his brain to shut down. Operating a variety of puppets like Naruto did kept his mind continually occupied. And it was circling around Orochimaru and the oddities with Suna. Sleep sometimes came, and it sometimes stayed away like an upset, pouting child. Taro got up and began wandering the village. He hadn't had a chance to do that in the light of day, not with his trio to keep on the straight and narrow. He walked down streets and remembered what they'd smelled like in the daylight with people moving on them and sun beating down. He meandered near to where his apartment building had stood. The fire he'd started had evidently destroyed a portion of the building. It had been razed but nothing else yet stood in its place. He walked over to that ramen stand he'd loved. It was closed now, but the scent of flavored broth hung tauntingly in the air. There was that playground that was usually deserted in the evenings. He had first used a swing set there. He decided, what the hell? For 20 minutes he pretended to be a kid, rather than a teenager trapped inside a puppet. He swung and he laughed and he tried to think good thoughts about the place he'd come back to. There weren't a lot of good memories, mostly of the old man in his office, or in that ramen stand, talking, listening to Naruto. That was before his cold, bureaucratic period, of course. Eventually he left the park. He was close now, close to a place he didn't want to visit. He hesitated to walk down a certain street, but eventually his feet took him to where his heart didn't want to go. This was where he'd been crushed between two carts. This was the alley he'd been chased down. This was the store where he'd tried to buy 2 plums. A sleepless Naruto wondered what had ever happened to the man. Was he the Kurosawa of Kurosawa Grocers? Did he live upstairs in the apartment above the store? Was his light on up there now? Taro jumped up and took a peek inside. He saw that hateful man, much aged, passed out in a chair. The wasteful lights were on inside the apartment. Naruto could see everything so clearly. The cause of so much pain had both his legs, had his health, was free to come and go and do as he pleased. He hadn't been forced to become an exile, he hadn't been forced to reverse engineer techniques in order to get training to be a ninja, he wasn't living the life of another, watching life on the outside pass him by. The old man was free, completely free. Something snapped inside of Naruto's mind. Anger, blinding red rage poured through him. He didn't know he had this kind of thing inside him. Was it the fox coming loose? Or was this from inside his own heart and mind? His arms ripped the window from the building. The Taro puppet was designed to be 10 times stronger than a human body. As the aged man woke from his sleep, he didn't realize the danger he was in. What? Why are you in my apartment, foreigner? Taro said nothing. His arms began raining blow after blow down onto the man's body. Ligaments cracked and tore. Bones chipped, broke, and ground together. Muscles sustained intolerable amounts of damage. Within 30 seconds, the grocer who refused to sell Naruto plums, who chased him away to meet 2 crushing carts in a busy street, who never received punishment of any sort, he was dead. His body looked like a small calf that had fallen into a pulverizing machine. Blood, and meat, and sinew dripped onto the carpet, spread everywhere. When he stopped breaking a dead man's bones and tissue, Taro surveyed the bloody mess. Naruto captured the true image of his rage, and promptly vomited inside the confined space of Taro's hollow center. The stomach acids burned slightly on his mouth, face, chest, and hands. He roused himself from the red rage he couldn't stop seeing in front of him. He needed to get away. He needed to wash up. He needed to pray to Kami for forgiveness. He needed to check his seal to be sure that the fox wasn't loosening his bonds. Taro leapt away from the damaged apartment, jumping from roof to roof until he reached a tranquil training ground. He cleaned himself in a stream running through the property. Naruto had to exit Taro and then submerge his Taro puppet in the water to get out all the vomit. But the running water did nothing to wash away Naruto's current self-loathing. He had finally given in to his impulse for wrath. And it was horrible. He climbed back inside of Taro and slept the night in the forest. Finally, he did fall asleep. Hard asleep. Slept better than he had in years. The next day, a stunned and dismayed Hokage would visit the crime scene. He had never before in his tenure as Hokage visited a civilian crime scene, but he had kept the name Kurosawa in the back of his mind. He had expected something to eventually happen to the man, but he hadn't expected this. No, not at all. A piece of the man's cracked skull had been flung to the ceiling. It hung there still, held in place by drying gore. This was the work of a Naruto he didn't know. Or, the Hokage reminded himself, the work of someone who knew of Naruto, or acted on his command. It might not be Naruto's hand that did this, just his voice ordering it. The style was all wrong, for one thing. Naruto's puppetry was elegant and hard to detect, the Hokage had fallen victim to the same trick twice, a feat few could claim to have gotten past the god of shinobi. This attack was more like a mauling. The ex-ninja didn't have an unbroken bone larger than a few centimeters. What had happened to Naruto in the last 6 years? The Hokage had recognized that the boy was angry. Was this brutality a result of his tenant? He hadn't felt demonic chakra last night. Why was Naruto back after his self-imposed exile? To do more of this? To kill more Leaf civilians or ninja? Had he snuck in with all the foreign ninja in town for the tournament? The Hokage felt old, bone-weary old. It was most disturbing. The Hokage prayed that Naruto had not done this thing, but he could do nothing but believe that the small blonde boy was involved. Chapter 11. Taro regarded the preliminary eliminations with a bored expression. He didn't have a clue why there was a prelim round. Only 5 of 22 teams finished the Forest of Death exam. Surely the rich civilians, lords, and ninjas could stand to watch 15 competitors demonstrate their skills. Taro looked over the genin standing below him. The grass team, the sand team, an odd bunch from Sound, and 2 teams from Konoha. By the way the Hidden Leaf members looked, they were surprised so few Leaf teams finished. Apparently 3 rookie teams had been entered and none of them acquired both scrolls. Indeed, one of the teams had suffered a fatality, an Akimichi. The speeches and posturing ended. Taro was only interested a single time in the proceedings. A Konoha genin, silver-haired and in glasses, a geek of the highest order, excused himself from the prelims. As he walked out of the venue, Taro's eyes followed him and assessed his physical condition. There was nothing wrong with him, nothing at all. Interesting. A few dozen spy-capacity micro-puppets flew from a storage compartment and made their new home in the genin's hair and clothing. This person merited more observation. Someone with the stones to lie to the Hokage about his physical condition was either crazy, or up to something. The matches began. Taro watched to see what the current standard of genin was. There were some interesting developments, but most of it was fairly low level. The best match was a rather flashy battle between a lithe Leaf genin and that red-headed monster from Sand. Naruto felt a chakra signature surge momentarily. It was one he didn't like. It was suppressed quickly, but Taro was designed to detect things like that. Orochimaru was in the room. The present battle had excited or enraged him. Taro swept his eyes across the room. He felt it again when the red-headed freak almost crushed the Leaf genin. There, he was the Sound's team sensei. Or at least hiding out in his form. Bad, very bad news. Taro's eyes remained fixed on the battles, but Naruto inside him was keeping an eye on the Sound genin. Then something came down the chakra strings attached to the silver-haired genin. Kabuto was also speaking with Orochimaru. All of Naruto's attention went into listening in via his spying micro-puppets. You dropped out again, Kabuto? The Sunin asked. The smile on his face looked cruel. I need to remain unsuspected for some while yet. Then I can reveal more, of who I really am. Fine. Please work with our allies to set everything into motion. I expect our allies to have plenty of legitimate reasons to be in and out of the Leaf. My observations, Kabuto said, are that our ace in the hole will perform as expected. I followed him around before the tournament started. The Leaf will be in for a treat. I will let you on your way, then. One final thing, see what you can learn about the genin from grass. He has a rather large, interfering nose. He might need to learn a lesson. Information, first, though. Yes, my lord. The pair parted and Naruto lost himself in thought. He followed Kabuto on his viewing screen, but the genin went nowhere else of interest. The collaborator, Kabuto, had information that Naruto wanted for himself. The genin didn't know it yet, but his life was forfeit. Taro paid half a mind to the rest of the exhibition, but he couldn't keep Orochimaru out of his thoughts. The hints were there. But Taro did not know the when and where, the fine details. He really needed a better source of information on the man. Taro stood impassive until the prelims were over and the final round draws were done. He collected his 3 genin, all successful in passing into the finals. It was expected. Come, Taro said. We will be leaving the village now. We're not training in such a place as this for the next month. Relief washed over their faces. None of them had ever been in such a dangerous place as this village before. Orochimaru struck twice. That red-headed kid was a menace. It was tough being on guard all the time. In the preparations for leaving, none of his genin noticed Taro's creation of a half-dozen shadow clones which promptly hung into other forms. They had a task to complete. As Taro took his students for a last dinner before departing Konoha for a month, the shadow clones approached to where the genin Kabuto was speaking in hushed, rushed tones. The spy micro-puppets captured everything said, and now it was time to capture Kabuto himself. Naruto needed to know what this interesting person knew. The shadow clones formed up thick chakra strings. Two of them coordinated their strike. Kabuto walked away from his meeting and turned down a darkened street when he felt foreign chakra enter his body. Within a second, he lost all control of his muscles and began to fall. Just as quickly he felt something holding him up. It was the shadow clones doing it, of course. One of the two shadow clones wielding chakra strings had penetrated Kabuto's spinal cord with chakra, and temporarily disrupted the transmission of nerve information at the C5 vertebra. When the technique was released, Kabuto's spinal cord would be undamaged, so long as Naruto wished that to happen. The other clone quickly deployed chakra strings to Kabuto's hands, legs, and major joints to keep him from slumping over like a worthless drunk. The other shadow clones hung back in case anything unexpected happened. Kabuto walked to a darkened training ground. The first test of the puppet master technique was a success. In theory, it should work every time, but it was always in practice that things went wrong. One of the shadow clones rifled through Kabuto's belongings and found a blank scroll. The clone traced out a complex sealing array and then placed Kabuto's forehead to the scroll. An application of chakra later, and Kabuto was gone, leaving only the scroll. All the shadow clones save for the one clutching the scroll dismissed themselves. That clone walked slowly toward the village gate. He waited outside the village for nearly an hour before Taro plucked the rather valuable scroll from the shadow clone. That clone then returned inside the village and began its primary duty, espionage. As Naruto thought about the storage scroll in his hand, he wondered just how things had gotten that bad, that wrong in his former home. Spies walking everywhere, S-ranked ninja popping in and out. Taro needed a better handle on the place and what the Snake Sunin was planning. He needed accurate information. Too bad this genin Kabuto lay in the way. It would be most unpleasant for him if he chose to be difficult. Number 4, do you want your sculptures back? Number 3 asked. Hold on to them until the end of this tournament. Better you have something in reserve. They had traveled through the night and only begun talking once they hit the grass country border. Are we taking missions while we're back in grass? Number 1 asked. Taro shook his head. No. You are on training leave for the next month. I am going to help each of you to create at least one new original technique, plus I am going to ensure that you have the techniques and information necessary to handle your opponents. We have a Hyuga, a Jinchuriki, and some type of bizarre medical experiment, attaching sound-making machines to a human body. It's rather distasteful. Naruto spent the rest of the run back to the village explaining what he knew of the Byakugan, what he knew of the Biju and those humans unfortunate enough to imprison them, and his hypotheses about Orochimaru and the hidden sound village. His students were less than impressed, and were openly debating whether they should return to Konoha at all. Number 3 was visibly upset at having to fight a Jinchuriki. Stop it. Number 3 already has the beginning of a technique to deal with Gaara. We'll need to get your steam even hotter. What will that do, number 4? We will increase the pressure exerted by your air affinity to increase the temperature of your steam. If we get it right, your superheated steam will be able to penetrate even sand armor, I'd expect. The redhead's ultimate defense is not perfect. The genin were not convinced. Taro led his students to his apartment and offered them tea. Let me explain. Every technique, no matter how imposing, has flaws. So long as a ninja is aware of the flaws, he or she can adapt or compensate for them. But this Jinchuriki has no other techniques we've seen other than his sand. His body is thin and weak, he does not exercise. I doubt he even has a taijutsu style. He's relied upon a single style of ninja art, which we will be picking apart and destroying theoretically during our training period, and then for real in 1 month. Number 3 looked a little less pale, but he wasn't fully convinced. Fine, perhaps I can use a steam attack against him. But how do I use it while protecting myself from his sand? Taro nodded. It was an excellent question. You have realized the weakness of your steam. It's powerful offensively, but offers little defensive protection. Sometimes it is necessary to pair techniques together in order to minimize weaknesses. Can you think of something that would stop sand? Number 1 nodded. A water technique of some sort. Something that would soak the sand. Number 2 nodded. Or wind. Something that flings back whatever sand approaches you. Okay, I get it. This isn't a death sentence, number 3 said. No. Number 3 will win his battle if I have anything to do with it. You will be ready, I promise. Naruto gave his genin the morning off to recuperate from their vicious training cycles of the previous day. He'd worked up a bit of technique using his wind affinity to mimic Gaara's sand-wielding ability. From what he'd heard of Orochimaru and Kabuto's conversation, Gaara was involved in all of this. He wanted his students prepared to deal with him. He'd blasted number 3 with it for hours, and forced numbers 1 and 2 to take an hour each. He'd helped number 2 with a vicious new technique, vicious and non-lethal. She had Hyuga Neji to deal with and Taro didn't especially want her to kill him. Almost everything in number 2's quiver was lethal and messy. Number 1 had to go against that medical experiment from sound. He was working on a genjutsu that inflicted pain proportional to whatever the ensnared thought they were inflicting. They were all becoming excited about their upcoming matches, even number 3. Their change in attitude, almost as much as the beating they'd received in training yesterday, earned them a day off. There was also the fact that Naruto was excited to finally sit down to talk to Kabuto. He made the journey to the largest of his bold holes in grass country. He'd long since turned it into his laboratory. He had a room for distilling poisons. He had a room for copies of the jutsu scrolls he'd collected and stolen. 2 rooms held various experiments with different micro-puppets and his stick of tools and supplies to create them. He now needed to make a new room for his newest acquisition. It only took an hour to carve it with a rather useful earth technique. He fashioned a rather substantial door and hung it. Naruto, still inside his Taro puppet, walked inside. He pulled out a special storage scroll and set it on the floor. He unraveled 100 chakra strings and made ready to unseal the scroll's contents. He pumped chakra into the sealed scroll. A confused, immobilized genin appeared on the stone floor. Taro's chakra strings pressed up against Kabuto's spinal cord again, keeping him immobile. Taro had spent a few hours preparing a restraining device he wanted to test out on this genin. Kabuto finally roused from his enforced stupor. "Where am I?" "Somewhere very safe," Taro said. "You'll be my guest now, genin of Konoha, or are you infiltrator from Sound?" Kabuto's face tensed. "How are you doing this?" "Keeping me frozen. I'm not about to start giving away my secrets, am I? I would like to talk about Orochimaru and his plans for the Chunin selection exam." "I'm not telling you anything," Kabuto spat. "You will, little genin, you will if you ever expect to eat." "I would rather die." Taro smiled. "Let me fit you up with your restraints." Taro pulled out long strips of something. They didn't look like paper or cloth. They had extensive and tiny seals all over their surface. He affixed one strip to Kabuto's neck, where it promptly dissolved into the man's neck, leaving only the seals partially visible. Taro stripped the rest of Kabuto's clothing and wound the strange strips all over his torso, his arms, and his legs. Only after the last strip was applied to Kabuto's body did Taro apply chakra to the seals now permanently tattooed on his body. Taro stepped back and threw a lightweight sheet over the naked genin's body. Then he withdrew the chakra strings, keeping Kabuto paralyzed. Kabuto started to move and then he leapt at Taro. Taro smacked him across the small room. When Kabuto hit the solid stone, he flopped over and stopped moving. "Let me be clear. You will never mold chakra again so long as you fight me. You will never mold chakra again if you ever lie to me. With a thought these seals can activate. You have 500 exploding seals etched inside your body now," Kabuto. A horror-stricken Kabuto raised his head up from the floor. How could you do that? How was it possible? A lot of hard work. Now, you will tell me what you know of Orochimaru's plans. Be fast about it and I will find you some lunch. Kabuto didn't like his chances. He had turned on Sasori when Orochimaru offered a better deal. Now this unknown quantity was offering a terrible deal, but it was better than being utterly destroyed. The threatened 500 exploding seals would do more damage to his body than his self-regenerative abilities would heal. I have worked with him for a few years but I've only ever met with him a handful of times. No. Let's start with what you know of his attack on Konoha. Kabuto's head dipped toward the stone floor. I only know enough to complete my role. I was to ensure that Uchiha Sasuke made it out of the forest alive, even if he failed to make it into the finals. I was to layer a genjutsu over the audience at the finals once that Gaara Kid begins his fight. Naruto felt sicker and sicker the more he heard of this plot. Kabuto gave over a lot of information, but he didn't seem to possess the full plan. This would all be very problematic. Naruto needed to finish his puppet clone technique. He needed it in his repertoire if things went as badly as he feared. As Taro returned with his students a day before the finals, everyone was in good spirits. They had plans, and backup plans, and had been working on improvisation skills. Taro expected some terrible things to happen in the next day or two. He hadn't passed on his knowledge of the exact details of what was supposed to happen, but he had done everything to prepare them to survive. Trial by fire for everyone involved. The four showed up the morning of the finals. Taro led them through final stretching and sparred with all three of them at the same time. The first two matches went as expected. The medical experiment had but one technique. Number 1 trapped the kid in a genjutsu within seconds. The boy proceeded to attack and attack. His mind was so overwhelmed with redirected pain that the genin's nose began to bleed and he eventually fell over onto the ground, convulsing. Every genin needed to be able to dispel a genjutsu. It was a basic requirement for field operations. The feared Hyuga had a wider range of attacks, but he was a short-distance fighter only. Number 2 preferred medium and long-range attacks. She took a bloody 10 minutes to demolish the pride of the Hyuga. He put up a good fight, but he was completely outclassed. The third match, the Jinchuriki versus number 3, began as expected. The weak redhead deployed his sand and didn't even move around the field of combat. Number 3 used a high-level water technique to soak a good portion of the sand. Then he went to stage 2, an A-dash, bordering on S-rank technique for superheating and focusing a beam of steam. His use of the technique pierced right through Gaara's remaining sand in his sand armor. It created a hole straight through Gaara's shoulder which began to weep, then gush blood. The red-headed genin lost it then. And all hell broke loose in the arena. The bad thing which was going to happen, had just started. Chapter 12. The many fires inside Hidden Leaf began almost simultaneously. 15 clan compounds, 24 apartment buildings, commercial buildings, everything was fair game. It was a great diversionary tactic performed by 24 infiltrators from Suna. The command and control of the ninja force would break down, people would be trying to put out fires while the major strikes occurred. The more ninja prevented from repelling the major Suna and Oto, the more devastating their entry would be. Oto's trapping experts began their work rigging up the Hokage Tower and the Ninja Academy building. Lord Orochimaru would detonate these buildings once his conquest of Hidden Leaf was complete. While the infiltrators and trappers were inside causing chaos, the heavy hitters from both villages were outside the village walls trying to bring them down. Some of Orochimaru's snake summons were queued up to crash through another section of the wall. It was amazing that the Umbu hadn't even detected these massive forces queuing up outside the village. Orochimaru's personal guards jumped through the city. They had been performing a final search for Kabuto in the interim. The spy appeared to have fled already. Lord Orochimaru would be most put out. Once they made it to the arena, Orochimaru had already captured the Hokage and begun his act of vengeance. The sound form molded a massive shield and then performed the jutsu a second time to protect themselves from the Hokage who was trapped inside their bubble. The arrogance of this village, Orochimaru hissed to his opponent on top of the arena to invite your enemies, to bare your throat to them, and not even to carry a knife to the battle. Where are your sensei? Why was this village so easy to destroy this day? Are you truly ready to die? Because I am most eager to kill you. The Hokage and Orochimaru were trading blows back and forth in hand-to-hand combat. Orochimaru wanted to utterly rattle the Hokage before he pulled out his final, devastating technique, the impure resurrection of the Hokage's predecessors in office. It had been a gamble attacking today. The disappearance of Kabuto had almost caused Orochimaru to call of this attack, but when the and Chunin patrols went as normal and the village wasn't on a higher security status, he guessed Kabuto hadn't defected to the Hokage's side. He would have to find and punish his infiltrator. Many things necessary for this attack hadn't been done. Kabuto would pay. His medical expertise was valuable, but Orochimaru could not stand a traitor. He was the only one of those permitted in the hidden sound. Orochimaru batted away one of his sensei's rather pedestrian techniques. He wished that Sarutobi would haul out his major techniques. He wouldn't want to win against a frail, old man. The Hokage summoned the boss of the apes. He needed to use every tool in his arsenal. But he no longer had the chakra capacity to battle for hours against his student. He knew what the surefire way to end Orochimaru's life was, but he didn't know if he could give himself to the Shinigami for all time the way that Namikaze Minato had. It was a horrendous fate for one such as he. To never see his deceased family, his one dead son, his mentors, all of his precious people. Are you ready for a good fight, Inma? He would try to for an unexpected hit. Something that wasn't as devastating as the summoning of the Shinigami. As you wish, old friend, the Ape King said. The Hokage remained nimble and his attacks with a bow would have been devastating to anyone not one of his students. They had spent too many years training against him to be surprised by Sarutobi's style. The Snake Sunin continued to taunt and rant, but the Hokage didn't listen to it. He was in this fight to preserve his village. He had lived a long time, but he didn't want to go out when his village was in peril. Not if he could fix his gravest mistake, not if he could somewhat repair his failure allowing Orochimaru to escape when his treacheries were discovered. You've never recognized your own faults, student of mine. If you could not have this village, then you wish to destroy it. Orochimaru laughed. You are a narrow-minded fool, protector of the weak, savior of stranded kittens everywhere. This village is as foolish as it is weak. I am only performing a service, a cleansing wash to get rid of all this rot. The Hokage was not winning, rather, he was slowly losing. The Hokage steeled himself to using the Shinigami summoning technique. It would cost him everything, but he knew he would take his greatest mistake with him. The village deserved this much from him. Orochimaru began the complex process of powering up his impure resurrection technique. He was ready for a bloody fight with powerful servant puppets at his disposal. The Hokage worried that he did not recognize this technique. If it had been developed by his student, it was likely to be powerful and disturbing. He gripped his special staff and prepared to face whatever might come. Then the Hokage disappeared. There was no one more surprised than the Hokage. He had a fraction of a second to recognize that he was trapped in some sort of sealing technique. Inma in his bow form fell to the ground and dispelled. Orochimaru stood, dismayed. His hands were frozen in the final hand seals for his impure resurrection. Where had that old bastard gone? How had he escaped from inside this shield? It was designed to kill anyone or anything that touched it. No. No. Where did he go? Who fucked up? He turned round and round glaring at his bodyguards. Then he saw Jirobo fall over dead, then Kidomaru. The shields began to waver then. Then Tayuya collapsed. The shields collapsed. Orochimaru had no idea what was happening, he didn't even know it was possible to disrupt the shield. Orochimaru glared at the unfair world. Years of planning rendered useless. He didn't even know how. His mind began to grasp and prepare for the next phases of what he might do. Sarutobi had fled with his life, but Orochimaru could still destroy the village and kill its weaklings. He surveyed the roof and was preparing to jump off to cause more devastation when he felt 1,000 tiny pinpricks all over his body. He staggered at the sensation, then the flood of pain. It had been a very long time since he'd felt anything like that, probably going back to his earliest experiments on himself to attain immortality. He reeled but did not fall down. His first thought was to flee, as self-preservation was a key trait of any powerful snake, but then his anger and his ego overrode instinct. He wanted to know who had ruined years of planning. So many things had gone wrong. His strongest potential vessel for his immortality technique, the Kaguya boy, had disappeared years ago. Kabuto had disappeared. Some jonin from grass had managed to drive him off with a technique he couldn't unravel. Now, this. Orochimaru wanted blood, he wanted guts and brains and bones ground down to meal. He wanted Sarutobi lying dead before him and Konoha little more than ashes blowing away in the wind. Using his best chakra sensing techniques, he tried to locate the source of what was happening, and he found something. In great pain, he turned and saw a most unpleasant face. That ninja who'd prevented him from taking the faces of some grass genin. The man who stripped Orochimaru's ability to mold chakra, that ninja would die. You. How did you do this? That shield is the strongest technique of its kind. Tell me and I will give you a swift death. Taro smiled. You are the worst sneaky ninja I've ever seen. I had a very good idea about what you might do today, but you had no idea about me. I wonder what that says about your intelligence gathering, Snake Sunin. Oh, someone revealed to me that you're also quite a thief. Taro yanked his hand. Pain shot through Orochimaru's body as his sword, the grass cutter, stolen the grass country years earlier, ripped through bone, stomach lining, muscle, and skin on its way to Taro's hand. Taro was glad he'd kept returning to probe Kabuto's loosened lips. The existence of this sword inside of Orochimaru's body made this one-time-only attack possible. Anyone with skill in chakra strings could do this, but it took a devious ninja to think of the attack at all. It was very satisfying that Orochimaru's greatest close-range weapon was now turned against him. Orochimaru collapsed. How was that possible? His sword ripped from him, through him. Was this freak a magnetic field user, like that Kazekage his old pal Sasori had been so enamored of? Orochimaru had seen this ninja twice and been slapped like a small child, robbed of chakra molding and now his sword. How? Why? Everything hurt so much. I suspect you're immune to any poison you'd use, Orochimaru, so that sword wound won't necessarily kill you. But I know you aren't immune to cancer. Those tiny impacts you felt a few moments ago were the seeds of 1,000 small cancers already racing through your body. I estimate you have 5 days before your body fails, your organs eaten away from the inside. From what I understand, you'll have to find a new host. The pale, bleeding Sunin woke from his misery when he realized that this ninja knew about his most secret researches. Someone had betrayed him. Kabuto, Karen, someone very close. Orochimaru pushed himself up from his crumpled position on the arena roof. He began making hand signs, but again realized he couldn't mold chakra. The hole in his torso had apparently torn the chakra network in this body to shreds. I've heard all about your body swapping technique, the grass jonin said. Good luck getting away. Your guards seem to be indisposed. That hateful stare from the grass ninja burned itself into Orochimaru's mind. It was a face he would never forget. He would have his revenge. If it took 100 years, he would have this man's life. Orochimaru would still be young, agile, and beautiful while the ninja before him was old and infirm. If it took that long, Orochimaru would find the old, weak, infirm man and end his life slowly, painfully. The pooling blood reached into Orochimaru's field of vision, he didn't know why he was still alive. This grass ninja could have incinerated him by now, instead of staring. The Sunin felt a hand grasp him, interrupting his dark musings. He looked up and saw it was Seikon. My lord, I couldn't move until now. Away. Get us away, Orochimaru rasped out. This would have been an excellent time to have Kabuto around. If he wasn't a traitor. The guard and his lord shined away. Taro smiled. Anyone who threatened his team deserved to die. Taro could have done worse to the Snake Sunin, but he relished the idea of tearing that creature apart slowly, piece by piece. He felt an irrational amount of hatred toward the pale ninja, a hatred he would allow himself to quench. Taro walked to the edge of the arena and observed the field of battle below him. The useless Umbu watching Orochimaru's attempted assassination scattered when the Hokage disappeared, gone to locate him or help out repelling the invasion. Taro bent down and picked up an oddly inscribed stone and slipped it into his pocket. The Hokage had never left the dome, of course, just been sealed away into an unconventional storage vessel. A chakra string was perfectly able to pass through that impenetrable shield. Arrogant ninja. Orochimaru knew of Sasori's art and still disregarded its power. The stone felt heavy in Taro's pocket. It had been obvious to any watchers that the Hokage was using all his effort, all his will, and that he was losing. Orochimaru had just been playing with him. Taro needed to keep the old man safe for a while longer. He wanted a word with him. But that wouldn't happen if the rest of this disaster didn't end soon. Taro looked into the distance and saw that the Suna and Oto ninja were still fighting. Their leader was driven from the field, but they'd lose their lives in a pointless, failed battle. Taro had thought long and hard in the last month about what he'd do when Konoha found itself in dire straits. Could he separate out the old man of his memory from the colder Hokage? Could he save the place the old man loved? He could just as easily let the whole place burn. Their arrogance had allowed this attack to occur. Did he really wish to be a savior of some sort? He stopped thinking and acted. He could second-guess himself later. He concentrated and formed two thick chakra cables. The individual strings stretched out and latched onto half-burned boards or fallen stones all through the field of battle. The process of inscribing seals was slower than he wanted. Using 12 individual chakra strings on each nascent heart stone took 30 seconds to get his mass puppet clone technique ready. Naruto intended to name this particular usage of his puppet clone's technique something else, the Flowing Red Death. Nearly as fast as the Yondaime Hokage's Flying Thunder God technique, and far more devastating. This was a technique that could destroy armies in seconds, end wars instantly, destroy and level villages. He wished he didn't have to reveal his greatest technique to save this miserable place. Seconds later, Naruto revealed how one ninja could destroy an entire army from a safe distance. His left pinky finger twitched a few millimeters. In front of every ninja Taro could see or otherwise detect a puppet clone erupted, forming up around its heart stone. Each puppet slashed with fire or wind or lightning once or twice, and then each of them disappeared. None of the newly dead even had a chance to blink. The mass slaughter of 200 enemy ninja took less than a quarter second from activation to the clone's dissipation. The few observers would only be able to report seeing a massive sea of red, the color of each puppet's hair, body, and clothing, a signature element of the Flowing Red Death meant to confuse and disorient anyone who might witness the technique. After that, they reported dead bodies as far as the eye could see. No ninja could defend against an attack so unexpected, so rapid, and so devastating. No one targeted did survive. In the coming days many would try to explain the attack and how it worked, no one would succeed at that, either. Taro jumped down from the arena roof with the Hokage safely sealed away inside his pocket. He needed to find where his students had gotten to, and to see if anyone had dealt with that insane redhead from Hidden Sand. Orochimaru was gravely wounded, the main body of the invasion force was destroyed, but Taro suspected that the worst was still to come. Why did he let the Grass Council send him and his team to this kami-forsaken place in the first place? Chapter 13. A small odd crowd watched as that horrible demonic sand beast took swipe after swipe against massive summons. A wolf larger than the Ninja Academy, a dragon longer than the eastern village wall, a rhinoceros with a horn jabbing in and out of the swirling sand of the raccoon-like abomination. It was a terrifying sort of theater, held in the forest outside the village walls. No one in the crowd had seen anything like it. The guardian animals looked like summons, but they didn't act like them. Indeed, none of the higher-level ninja knew who held contracts like these. They circled and enclosed and delayed the inevitable. Except that every time the sand beast attacked one of the other animals, the wolf, or the dragon or the rhino recovered from the wound and continued on their containment. They seemed to be waiting for something. Thankfully, none of the otherwise useless onlookers noticed 3 grass genin weary with chakra exhaustion in the woods nearby. They were vulnerable right now and didn't want any attention focused their way. They wouldn't be able to defend themselves against even a determined civilian assassin. It seemed like nothing would tip the balance. The 3 summons versus that sand monster. Then the scene changed. A real summon entered the battle with a tall old man, his shaggy white hair aloft in the wind, on top of his head. The wolf, dragon, and rhino regarded the massive toad for a moment before returning to their confinement of the sand beast. The small red-headed child on top of the sand beast yelled at the white-haired man. They feinted and parried their attacks. Then the redhead smiled a cruel smile and fell asleep. The sand beast increased in strength. It was a demon almost fully in possession of its ancient powers. Jiraiya the Toad Sage tried everything in his book of riddles. He used massive waves of oil-fueled fire. He tried sinking the sand beast in a massive chakra-driven swamp. Nothing worked. The sand whipped around faster and faster, stronger each passing second. Jiraiya spoke in hushed tones to convince Gamabunta to leap directly at the sand beast, to destroy the Jinchuriki, to end the demon's physical manifestation. It was a suicide move. Gamabunta would likely survive with only wounds. He could dissipate back to his own realm at will, even wounded he'd survive and get patched up. But Jiraiya would have to arrange a perfect strike at the Sand Kid or else he would die. Gamabunta leapt into the air, but something happened to the target. The sleeping redhead went flying through the air and collided into a tree. His eyes popped open. Once he was awake, the demonic sand monster was disrupted. Gamabunta fell through the air, passing through where the sand beast had been. He and his summoner landed in a thick, grating pile of sand. The sand beast was no more. Someone or something had attacked the Suna Kid. But who? Why? And why didn't Jiraiya think of doing something like that? Damn, he was getting slow in the head. Gamabunta began yelling at Jiraiya for being a stupid pervert with brain rot from all your whoring around. Those huge summons then vanished, too. Wolf, dragon, rhino, gone. Jiraiya hadn't had the time to even think about what they were, but, wow, damn. He need to question someone who'd seen the whole exchange. Several Suna shinobi went to either help or kill off the redhead, but Jiraiya saw another ninja intercept and restrain them. The tall, black-haired man knelt down and spoke to the Jinchuriki. The now fearful redhead nodded a few times and began crying. What in the hell could make a Jinchuriki cry, Jiraiya wondered. Less than a minute ago, he was trying to kill everything he set his eyes on. Who was this ninja who could say a few words and get that kind of reaction? Jiraiya needed to talk to this ninja. He jumped off Gamabunta, who was still yelling at Jiraiya, and rolled onto the ground, one of his more elegant moves. He ran toward the redhead and that other ninja. By the time he arrived, the redhead had been packed off by Suna ninja. The black-haired ninja stepped in front of Jiraiya, a mildly menacing gesture. The Toad Sage stopped as this ninja was his target. He could always catch up with the redhead later. He'd almost certainly be heading to Hidden Sand. Jiraiya could slap on some new seals and keep that blasted tanuki under control. You. Who are you? Jiraiya bellowed. He was going for intimidation. I am the one who will repair that boy's poor seals, the ninja responded. I am a seal master, young ninja. I am the great Toad Sage. A roll of the eyes showed exactly what the grass ninja thought of the Toad Sage. Jiraiya, yes I know. I know much of your exploits, venerable ninja. Jiraiya frowned. Venerable was just a politer word for old. No old ninja could still bag a dozen different beauties a week, no venerable ninja would have the stamina. And your name? I am called Taro of the River. It didn't mean anything to the Toad Sage. He needed more information. You fancy yourself some kind of seal master, then? Taro smiled. I do fairly well. Now, please excuse me. I have students to look after. Jiraiya held up his hand. Those grass ninja. You trained them. A look of pride erupted on Taro's face as he nodded. Those three are quite the powerhouse, Jiraiya said. They'd be brutal on the battlefield. I will pass along the compliment, Toad Sage. Taro then disappeared. Wait. Jiraiya still had questions. He had never heard of this Taro person before, and Jiraiya made it a point to know every seal master he came across. After all, no ninja could cause havoc quite like a seal master. Sealing demons, releasing demons, engineering exploding tags large enough to demolish a 15-foot wall. All the exploits of sealing masters. Damn. Now I need to find Sarutobi-sensei and tell him what I've seen. The toad sage bounded away. Taro looked at where Jiraiya had just stood. He waited for Jiraiya to leave before searching for his students. Jiraiya. The toad sage. Naruto remembered the profile of the man locked among the old man's secret papers. He remembered the birth certificate for one Uzumaki Naruto listing Jiraiya the toad son in his godfather. More anger bubbled inside Naruto. He began to regret helping to save this miserable place, save it for irresponsible assholes like this Jiraiya. A plan formed in his mind. Then Taro took off, tracking back to the micro-puppets he had on his students. They weren't injured, but were too weak to fight or defend themselves. He needed to get them situated. Jiraiya leapt all over the village, surveying the damage, helping where he could. His main priority right now was finding his sensei. He'd helped disarm a variety of explosives from the Hokage Tower, but no Sarutobi. He'd helped to stabilize the damaged walls of the hospital, but no Sarutobi. He tended to the wounds, helped put out fires, transported some of the prisoners of the invasion, no Sarutobi. The more he looked, the greater his fear. His sensei, the Hokage, was dead or captured. What would Konoha do without its leader? Could it rebuild? Could it survive? Taro took his students to an out-of-the-way training ground and threw up tents in the deep brush. He settled his students into bedrolls and made sure they drank water and took their ninja vitamin pills. They weren't dangerous like soldier pills, but they would help to repair the damage from mild to medium chakra exhaustion. I will be leaving some traps, but sleep with one eye open, as we like to say. I will return in a few hours to see how you are. If you're strong enough, we will return tonight or tomorrow. Did the statues work? Number 3 asked. Taro smiled. You 3 saved Konoha, and they'll never know. As you remember, a Jinchuriki key holds the power of a demon. But that boy had been driven insane by his. In his rage he released it fully. How do you stop a Biju? Number 1 asked. I didn't need to, Taro said. I only had to stop the technique the little boy was using. He'd gone to sleep and given the demon free rein. I used a simple technique called chakra strings to yank the boy off that sand creature and slam him into a tree. The crazed demon didn't even notice, he was too busy enjoying his freedom. Number 2 mumbled, half asleep. I am glad. Did you collect the statues you loaned us? Taro shook his head. No, they are designed to be used a single time. After the demon's fury broke, the 3 creatures released the chakra you gave them and dissolved into sawdust. Number 1 had to chuckle. You are paranoid about your techniques, aren't you, Number 4? All good ninja should be. I would not have such things used against me. With that he jumped from the tent and took off for the caverns beneath the Hokage monument. He wanted a quiet place for a conversation. When he released the seal storing the Hokage inside a chunk of broken masonry, the old man looked pale and determined. Where is Orochimaru? The Hokage shouted. He was shaking and looking around in confusion. I save your life, and you wonder where your worthless student is. I drove him off. Taro pulled a blade from the sheath on his back. After reclaiming this blade, the grass cutter, for my country. The anger in the Hokage's eyes dimmed. Thank you, then, for that service. How did my village fare? In a few minutes you can see for yourself. But, I will say that I am displeased with what you did with the warning I gave you. Orochimaru entered the forest of death and wounded countless students, including the near-fatal sealing of Uchiha Sasuke. I understand one of the Akimichi of the Hidden Leaf died. Then he pops up sitting next to you in the arena at the finals. You are too old to remain Hokage. I should kill you for your insolence, young ninja. As you have just saved my life, I will tell you this is not your concern. Taro nodded and made to leave the cavern. One measure of success of a leader is always having a successor groomed and prepared to take over, without interruption. Had I not saved you, who would have picked up the pieces? An angry, said Hokage blinked at the odd advice. Again, this is not your concern. I cannot discuss village secrets with one such as you. You are correct, of course, old man. I made the hidden leaf, not my concern, many years ago. Taro vanished before the Hokage could ascertain what the grass Jonin meant. Then the answer came to him. Naruto. He always called me old man. Perhaps he is becoming as strong as he claimed he would. The Hokage could not lift himself from the floor for a few minutes as tears streamed down his face. When the Hokage left the cavern to search for Naruto, the reality of the devastation in Hidden Leaf assaulted him. The dead. The wounded. The families burned out of their homes. Ninjas angry and ready for vengeance, needing a firm hand to restrain them now until a plan was ready. Then, Jiraiya insisted the Hokage visit the hospital before doing anything else. Being 70 with a severe case of chakra exhaustion was not a pleasant thing. As he was sent into an enforced sleep, the Hokage wondered if he should send an emissary to this Taro from Grass Country. The ninja had saved the Hokage's life. Naruto might be angry, but he still cared for the village. A bittersweet realization. The grass team left in the pre-dawn hours the next day. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 were feeling much better. I have not discussed it with the grass council obviously, Taro said, but all 3 of you qualify as Chunin in my book. Thank you, number 4, number 1 said. The group then fell silent as they began their journey. By sundown they'd be in Grass Country. They were moving at a far slower pace than usual given the events of the previous day. As with the last time he left Hidden Leaf, Taro left behind a few shadow clones. They had a task to perform. A few hours later, when Kunoichi and civilian women began attending the baths, the shadow clones discovered their target, Jiraiya, peeping. A few chakra strings interrupted the nerve signals from his brain. A quick storage scroll later, and Jiraiya was a captive. Predictability in a ninja was a dangerous thing, as Jiraiya might someday finally learn. All but one of the shadow clones dispelled. The remaining one hung into an injured man's face and clothing. It walked slowly, painfully, to the village gates. Mixed in among all the devastation, no one noticed how Jiraiya the Toad Sage left the Hidden Leaf village. Chapter 14. Into every victory, tendrils of defeat must creep. Naruto and his team did not make it back to grass without a nasty surprise. A massive dark-cloaked ninja erupted from the underbrush when the team was within 10 kilometers of the Grass Country border. I would speak with Taro of the river, please. The voice was gravelly and inhuman. A chill went up Naruto's spine as he rested within the body of his puppet Taro. He recognized this hulking beast. The useful trader Kabuto had described him exactly this way. This was a battle puppet of Akasuna no Sasori, the revered, insane puppet master from Hidden Sand. The man was at least 20 years older than Naruto, and had been trained by other puppeteers. It was terrifying looking at this other puppet, looking and wondering what Sasori saw when he looked at Taro. Would this master of the puppet technique recognize another puppeteer in Taro and Naruto? This was the worst possible person to meet up with on a day like this, with tired Chunin to be. My name is Taro, Naruto's puppet intoned in a perfectly human voice. The revolting puppet in front of them gave Taro a careful scrutiny. You are smaller than I expected. From the wild reports I've received, I figured you for at least 15 feet tall. Is it true you eat a whole cow for breakfast in the morning? I did not ask for a reputation, Taro said. His students watched and prepared. They did not know that Sasori was stronger even than Orochimaru on a good day. Anyone who can gut my old, tricky friend Orochimaru is worthy of a reputation, Taro of the river. I wonder what would happen if you and I were to fight, eh? Taro drew the grass cutter off his back. With his other hand, he prepared 100 of his puppet clones in case of dire straits. Naruto didn't want to reveal that he was a puppeteer in front of this S-rank monster. In truth, he wasn't even sure his self-designed puppet techniques would be able to cause any damage to another puppet master. Sasori wore a hardened shell so Taro's micro-puppets and chakra poisons were useless. A master puppeteer could just as easily overpower Naruto's chakra strings attached to a puppet army as fall victim to it. If a fight broke out, he would have to go nuclear quickly. Naruto had devastating techniques, but he'd never fought against a skilled puppeteer before. Naruto remembered a profile he'd read of the Uchiha among the Hokage's papers. Their arrogance is astounding as they teach their children, only an Uchiha can kill an Uchiha. Naruto was fairly terrified that the real truth was that only a puppeteer could kill another puppeteer. Today was not the day he wanted to test that hypothesis. After all, he knew from close calls in the past that experience could beat out superior techniques any day of the week. Upon seeing Taro draw the grass cutter, Sasori did not attack. He chuckled. Excellent. Excellent work, Taro. I see that my spies were not wrong. You have taken that sword from Orochimaru. Sasori's puppet gave some more gravelly chuckles. For the pleasure you've given me this day, you may pass. But you interest me, so I'm sure I'll be seeing you again. The large hulk quickly took off in the direction of Wind Country. Taro and his students did not move until Sasori was no longer visible. Was that? Number 2 began to ask. They say his parents named him the Scorpion of the Bloody Sands at birth, Taro explained. He's only gotten worse since then. Taro's students nodded. They had studied the bingo books. We'll be running the rest of the way. Keep your senses keen. Presume that we're walking into traps and ambushes. We will not stop, if possible, until we're in the central office. Taro didn't wait for an answer, he began to run. Who knows what some crafty bugger like Sasori could do given enough time. He allowed a narrow stream of questions to populate his mind. How had Sasori heard about the battle yesterday already? Spies, but who? How had Sasori known Taro's route? Taro hadn't taken a straight-line path. He cut through certain segments of the forest, he used roads that were little better than cart trails. Had Sasori's spies marked Taro in some way for tracking purposes? This wasn't a coincidence. Damn. 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 Naruto needed more experience before he wanted to have a target painted on his back. 3 days had passed since Taro had met Sasori on the road. He'd been stuck in meetings, debriefings, and every other kind of administrivia. He had not had a chance to return to his laboratory since returning. Naruto wanted out of Taro. He hadn't crawled out since vomiting on himself after his loss of control with the old storekeeper. He only entered or exited his puppet when he was in a safe place. Finally, Naruto couldn't stand it any longer. He put in for a 2-day leave to recuperate from his experiences. Once they realized that battling Orochimaru wasn't an abstract thing or a great story, but something Taro had actually done and likely something Taro needed to heal or recuperate from, the other Jonin looked sheepish and granted him the time off. He made it quickly to his laboratory complex. While he ran, he thought up more questions he had for Kabuto. He needed a more thorough interrogation on Kabuto's work with Sasori. Orochimaru angered Naruto, but Sasori scared him. He needed to figure out why. A ninja had to be in control of his emotions. Plus, Naruto had hated to feel fear. Kabuto should also have some progress on a few new, targeted poisons. A puppeteer couldn't rest on his laurels, after all. He knew more of the wider world now, he knew better the kinds of things he needed in his arsenal. One new poison was supposed to be a protection against the Hyuga or the Uchiha, people with special eye-based techniques. They wouldn't be able to use their eyes if they'd been dosed with an ocular nerve poison, right? It was a fairly extreme measure, but Naruto had heard some horrifying things about Uchiha Itachi. Seeing the Hyuga in person had also reminded Naruto to be more wary of them. After all, the Byakugan could likely detect chakra strings, if the wielder knew what he or she was looking for. Taro passed through the final door protecting his lab. Naruto piled out of his demmed puppet. He had been so busy during his training month that he hadn't left then. That was stupid. He had allowed himself to be preoccupied, to not take care of himself. He needed a shower. And some food that he didn't have to eat from the tube that came down Taro's mouth and throat. He had gotten tired of eating things that had already been chewed by his puppet's jaws first. The warm water felt great. He was too old to ride around in a puppet like that. It had been fun at the age of 8. Now that he was nearing 15, it was less fun. Taro's identity was almost at the end of its usefulness anyway. Sasori and Orochimaru were both interested in Taro. It was time for Taro to disappear. How? Perhaps Naruto would take over the life of an Iwa peasant farmer, or a tea-drying warehouse manager. It was good he'd made other identities so long ago. All the better to slip away. But, what would he tell his students? The three of them were probably the only people Naruto had ever formed an emotional connection to, leaving aside the old man. He didn't know what he wanted to do. The answer would come in time. Taro walked down the hallway to where that worm Kabuto was stored. One needed to be wary even around someone who could no longer mold chakra. Tell me if the progress you've made is worth enough to keep me feeding you. It was a familiar ritual to Kabuto. He was little more than a laboratory rat now. He had thought long and hard about swallowing one or another of the various poisons available to him, or attempting to use them on his captor. He didn't have the right plan. He didn't know what the seals inscribed inside body would really do to him. He knew the threatened consequences, but it wasn't proof positive. The serum you requested is finished. It should work, but I don't have anyone to test it on. Unlike your former master, Kabuto, I do not test horrible poisons on innocents. I have a suitable test subject in mind. Taro accepted the poison and tucked it away safely. I have need of your memory again, Kabuto. We're going to talk about your former spy master, Sasori. Tell me how he met you. I've told you this before. You're going to tell me again, little ninja without chakra. I have information about this Sasori from other sources than you. I wish to know whether you're lying to me. Convince me, Kabuto. The silver-haired prisoner sighed and began. After listening to Kabuto for 6 hours, Naruto felt like he needed another shower. Kabuto was too dangerous a person to allow to live, powerful, amoral, and cruel, a mimic of great capacity, a spy able to infiltrate a village and remain for years. He locked Kabuto away. The ninja needed to be dealt with, but he was still useful for now. Naruto took a rather special storage scroll into another part of his laboratory, far away from Kabuto. He sealed himself inside a bare stone room. He formed up chakra strings, ready to immobilize Jiraiya once he reappeared. When Jiraiya awoke, he found he couldn't move, and he was in a horrible stone cellar. There was a guy in the corner, that grass Jonin. What the hell? Where am I and why can't I move? I choose not to let you move, Toad Sage. In fact, you won't move again until we've had a satisfactory conversation. I will kick your ass very soon. Taro nodded. Yes, in a straight fight you would likely win. But, know this, Jiraiya, I almost never fight fairly. Why be stupid and give up my advantages? How are you doing this? I've never heard of restraining seals that leave the head free but paralyze everything else. Taro kept a blank expression. Misdirection was a prime tool of a good ninja. Jiraiya filtered everything through his knowledge of seals and flashy techniques. Wouldn't he be surprised if he discovered 2 thin strands of chakra kept him lying on the cold stone floor? Jiraiya, dead last of his academy class, member of the legendary 3, holder of the Toad contract, mentor to the 4th Hokage and the only Leaf Ninja to ever exceed your own accomplishments, and godfather to that same man's son. Here Jiraiya looked confused. Godfather and you don't even remember. Fitting, I suppose. I've read many of your confidential reports to the Hokage over the years, Jiraiya. I know you asked for and received updates on the boy. His name was Uzumaki Naruto, I believe. How? How did a grass Jonin steal my coded reports? The man didn't want to believe. Naruto wouldn't be parting with any secrets this early. He wouldn't relate how he'd stolen the Hokage's private correspondence years ago. I have better spies than you do. Jiraiya had no intention of giving anything away. Fine. Let me see what I can guess from what I know of you. I'd say you would look in on the little guy once or twice a year, but without ever introducing yourself. Looked rather too much like your dead student, but he was also a reminder of the fox. How did you know? Jiraiya calmed himself a bit. He was giving away too much. The grass ninja had thrown him on the defensive. He didn't need to say anything, admit anything. Why does this matter? Naruto left Hidden Leaf years ago. I haven't seen him in, 7 years? If you're with the Akatsuki and looking for his current location, I'd be the last person to ask. Taro looked amused. Akatsuki, another topic of interest to me. But, let's finish our discussion on Naruto first. Why did you bother to go look at him if you didn't want to help care for him? Jiraiya sighed. Why do you want to know? My reasons are my own, Toad Sage. Answer the question or prepare to starve for the next week. My patience is gone. That broke Jiraiya. It wasn't like he was being asked about village security, he was giving his personal opinions on a kid who'd been missing for 7 years. You're right. I was a bastard. I saw how he lived and how he was treated. It was too hard to look at a tiny Minato and remember I'd never see him again. Taro's smile turned to a neutral stare. I wondered if you would say something like that. I'm not sure I believe it. We'll return to this topic in the future. Why don't we talk about Akatsuki? Let's start with a former member of theirs, Orochimaru. Jiraiya's eyes went wide. He hadn't confirmed that Orochimaru had once belonged. Whoever this grass ninja was, he was very well informed. 1 week after returning from Konoha, Taro was summoned before the Grass Ninja Council. Did they want another report? Naruto was back in his laboratory observing and controlling Taro from a distance. He hoped never to need to ride in the belly of a puppet again. The council room was unadorned and plain, as befitted an unpretentious nation like Grass. Taro took a seat at a large round table. Over the next 10 minutes, the senior Jonin of Grass entered and sat down. None of them nodded or smiled at Taro. This wasn't a happy meeting then. The current head of the council, Tenuya, bit his upper lip before speaking. Grass Country's long-standing ninja philosophy is to survive. We stay out of wars. We stay out of alliances. We do our missions and try to make the best possible lives for ourselves. One of our most important techniques is to purposefully not have cage-level ninja associated with our village. We value general strength, not individual strength. Those who hit cage level have stability problems in our experience. We have expelled quite a few. You, Taro or whatever your name really is, are a surprise to us. You were thought strong, not too strong, until this business with Orochimaru and then Sasori. You're expelling me from Grass Country. Taro kept blinking rapidly. This was certainly a surprise. As he considered it, it was not unwelcome. Tenuya looked sheepish at such a blunt question. Yes. You were able to wound, possibly kill an S-class ninja. You were tracked down by another one. If you remained here, you would draw all the wrong kinds of attention on us. Taro surveyed the faces of the other Jonin on the council. Naruto was trying to think through the implications of his expulsion. On balance, this was a positive. Taro needed to disappear. This could be the beginning move of a series of events in retiring Taro. If I accept this expulsion, I will not be listed in any Grass Bingo books, correct? Of course. This is an amicable split, Tenuya said. The Jonin knew it was dangerous negotiating these types of splits. If this Taro had as much power as it seemed he did, he could level much of this village and the Jonin in the room wouldn't be able to do much about it. If my students were to voluntarily choose to accompany me when I left the village, would they appear in any Grass Bingo books? Silent looks passed between the Jonin on the council. Finally Tenuya seemed prepared to speak. We could arrange that, if your Genin team wished to leave with you. Good. I think they should be promoted to Chunin for their performance in Konoha. Tenuya nodded. We had already approved your recommendation, Taro. Thank you. I will be gone by tomorrow at dusk. Taro made to stand and leave. Tenuya motioned for him to remain seated. There is another issue, a delicate one. With your departure, we feel it would be best for the legendary grass cutter, which you recovered, to remain here in Grass Country. Can we come to some sort of agreement on this matter? Taro had to smile. These guys had balls. First they kick him out, then they ask him to leave Grass Country's most valued ninja treasure behind. I think we can, Taro said. What do you have to offer? The council looked equal parts pleased and annoyed. They would regain the treasure, but it was likely to be expensive, very expensive. Chapter 15. Taro summoned his students to him. When number 2 went to speak, Taro held up his hand in a hold signal. He led his students outside the village walls and then took off at a dead run. He led his students through 5 large stands of bamboo zigging and weaving all the way for kilometers. He finally slowed as he approached a bolt hole he considered expendable. It would be used for this meeting only and then destroyed. It took 15 minutes to get underground and into the secure room. It had only a table and 4 chairs. Taro beckoned them to take chairs. Awfully cloak and dagger, number 4, number 1 joked. Yes, I apologize. But circumstances have changed for me. I was banished from grass. What? Number 2 hissed. Don't interrupt, please. I said I was banished from hidden grass today. I must leave by tomorrow evening. He held up his hand when number 1 tried to interrupt. It's fine. I can accept their reasoning. If I stay then I might drag Orochimaru and Sasori into conflict with us. So it was a mutual decision, up to a point. I did negotiate a few concessions. I will not be considered a missing ninja. Also, if any or all of you wished to accompany me, you would not be considered missing ninja. If you wish to remain, then you would be promoted to Chunin of the Grass. Before we leave this safe space today, I must have a decision from each of you. Taro gestured. They were now permitted to speak. But his students were silent for more than a minute. You are banished because you saved us from Orochimaru. Number 3 asked. In part. I am now considered S-rank by the village council, and grass never permits S-rank ninjas to remain. I am the 3rd to be expelled for this reason in the last decade. The last was a truly vile ninja called Zetsu. He transformed his body into some sort of plant, and he practiced cannibalism. I'm in rather poor company in that regard. What do you plan to do? Number 1 asked. That is the right question to ask. I have quite a few plans, some involving dealing with the snake Sunin. He would never have come to my attention had he not attacked you. I also need to deal with that red-headed boy from Hidden Sand. Beyond that, I can see us developing our own village. During all this I will continue the ninja training we've started and development of more elusive arts. Number 1 looked confused, but it washed off his face. I want to be a great hunter, killing the worst missing ninjas. We only got to do as much of that because we were with you. I don't know that I can accomplish my goals if I remain behind. Taro nodded. Number 1 wanted Taro to promise to help him with his goal. Taro wanted to, he wanted to help sway them, but his students needed to work this out for themselves. They knew their goals. They needed to determine for themselves how best to achieve them. Whether it was with Taro or not was up to them. Number 3 bit at his lip until it bled. I always thought I wanted to be Jonin of Grass, like my father and my older brother. But I hate the idea that I would be kicked out if I became too powerful. The compressed steam I prefer to use could eventually become an S-ranked technique, at least I hope it could. I would hate to achieve so much and then be dismissed like so much trash. Taro looked at number 2. She sighed. I have no reservations about leaving. Be sure. I don't know if grass would take you back if you chose to return, Taro said. The conversation continued for a few more hours, talking it all out. How they would harass Orochimaru to gain experience, where and when they might set up a village. After Naruto was confident in their decisions and loyalty, he decided to take a major risk. I have one final detail to show you. I hope it will not change your decision, but you do deserve to know. Well, let me just show you. With that, Naruto kicked open the hatch and fell out. A rather inelegant introduction to the students he'd trained for the last 2 years. His students, who were fairly unflappable, looked aghast. Some boy had just climbed out of their sensei. What was going on? My name is Naruto. I am a puppeteer, like that bastard Sasori. I have been your sensei these years, operating behind the scenes with my good pal, Taro, there. The conversation that sparked lasted well into the evening hours. Number 1 turned his silver hair black. Number 2's long hair was now braided and fashioned into a bun of the back of her head. Number 3 had dumped his green-colored clothing for blacks and reds. Each of them had decided to have a ceremonial rebirth after they departed grass. Naruto was gratified they had taken his secret in stride. In public he still rode with Taro, but soon that would need to end. Taro had to have a public disaster of some sort. He had the rough outline of a plan, but the details needed sorting. They moved rapidly south of grass country, eventually to end near wind country. Naruto really had told Gaara that he would track him down and kill the Jinchuriki if he did not present himself for seal enhancements at a particular date and time. It just so happened that Naruto and his students would arrive only 2 days before Gaara was due. When they arrived in river country, Naruto gave his students a brief tour of the sights on their way to the largest civilian village in the country. He missed living here. It was beautiful, peaceful, save for that horrifying memory of being attacked by Suna ninjas years ago. Naruto and his students slept that night in tents. They had a restful day, almost like a vacation. Some of them swam in the river for hours, for fun rather than for training. Taro wandered in the forests he remembered so fondly. They ate a brace of rabbits caught by number 1, roasted over flames with root vegetables found nearby. There was little more satisfying than that. Sleeping out of doors, faces a bit cold, bodies warm from sleeping bags was a wonderful thing. It was a nice evening for all. And then Gaara appeared at 5 o'clock the next morning, hours before the scheduled meet. How he'd found them, Naruto didn't know. Taro was up within moments of detecting Gaara's rather unique style of chakra. He stood outside while his students dressed. It didn't take long for the sand ninja to traverse the trap field laid by numbers 1 and 4. His sand, even now, aided him. "You know how to defeat Mother," Gaara said, pointing at Taro. "Help me. Mother has been sleeping, but she'll come back eventually." Taro stared at the Jinchuriki. "It is good you came. Take off your shirt and lay on the grass in the clearing. I will be instructing my students as I work on your seal. Let me explain what will happen to you as a result." "Yes," Gaara said as he knelt down and waited for freedom to come. He had had time to dwell on his mortality, and it was a glorious time without Mother whispering to him, goading him. He wanted a different sort of life. "I will be adding seals to what was already done to you." Taro bent over and examined the structure on Gaara's back. As he'd feared, it was a hatchet job. Weak, perhaps intentionally so, dangerously so. "Sit up, Gaara. I need to sketch this out on paper first to be sure there are no mistakes. Once a seal like this hits flesh, there's no changing things. What do you intend to do? How will it silence Mother?" The 3 former Chunin of grass wondered how number 4, Naruto, could be so calmly speaking with this crazy ninja. They watched and listened and did not interrupt. "I had intended 3 new sealing arrays, but I may need 4 or 5 now. One will end your Biju's ability to access your body or mind. Another will force open the demonic chakra possessed by your Biju and permit you to draw upon it freely. A third seal will assist in purifying the demonic chakra into something you can use without dangerous consequences." Gaara didn't blink while Taro was speaking. He looked like he understood what Taro said, but it was unnerving talking to someone who didn't react, who didn't act at all human. "How do you know this?" Gaara asked. Naruto had access to his father's research on Biju sealing, but he couldn't admit that. "I have made a study of this, and have access to much research done over the years. Many of the greatest sealing masters study the Jinchuriki seals precisely because they are so complex and touchy. There are few techniques in the world more complex." Gaara nodded. "Would you have come after me as you threatened? Had you not come here, today? I'd have been in your bedroom by this time tomorrow ending your life, little ninja. Do you have any questions about the seals? When will you be ready?" Taro pointed to the ground. "Sit and be silent for 20 minutes. I should have this done by then." The time passed slowly for the nervous students. Gaara didn't seem to move at least during that time. Naruto finished his sketch and checked over the final points. He decided to add a 4th seal, based on an item Naruto carried in his seal. It guaranteed that should Gaara die, then all the chakra would instantly bleed into the earth. A Biju dispatched in such a way should never be able to reform. Naruto looked up and saw Gaara staring at him. Naruto did not like the Jinchuriki, but he realized he could just have easily turned into this type of insane, murdering monster. He felt empathy, which was why Gaara was still alive, rather than buried underneath one of Konoha's many forests. Taro stood up to cross over to where Gaara was sitting when he felt a disturbance in the micro-puppets 1 kilometer away. Someone was approaching quickly from Suna. "Does anyone know you're here, Gaara?" The redhead shook his head. "They would not wish me to meet with a foreign ninja." Taro nodded at his students. They prepared for a violent confrontation of some sort. Less than a minute later, a Jonin walked slowly out of the nearby forest. He held his hands up in a non-threatening way. Taro had been awkwardly interrogated by this Jonin inside a dive bar in Konoha. He was Gaara's sensei. "Gaara, you are needed back in Suna." "Wait, Paku. I am consulting with this ninja on some of my problems." "Gaara, leave now. Anything you might say to these people would be a state secret." Taro began walking toward the Suna Jonin. "Gaara's presence this day was the cost for me not killing him in Konoha. I intend to fix what your people have left incomplete. In less than an hour, Gaara will have no more mental or bodily interconnection with his Biju. You may not do this. I am acting Kaze Kage. Do not touch a ninja under my command." Gaara looked at his sensei. "Why would you stop this, Paku? I would not have you weaken yourself. I will strengthen myself. I will have the power to help my country, rather than terrorize it. Do you not wish this? We have need of your talents, Gaara. Orochimaru betrayed us. He murdered your father, the Kaze Kage. I would send you against him, to destroy him entirely." Gaara breathed slowly for a few moments before he responded. "You wish to assign me to a suicide mission, then? Orochimaru can be beaten, but I have not trained to do this. I do not accept." "So be it," Paku said, before dispelling. "A clone of some sort." Taro had expected this, but everyone else seemed surprised. The attack came first from the north, a hail of spears. Number 3 let loose with a widely dispersed blast of steam. The spears began to melt, their shapes distorted. Instead of cutting through the air like weapons, they hit wind resistance and sunk like stones. Taro knew precisely where Paku was, but he wanted to give Gaara a test of his hopefully new ideals. What would Gaara do to a former mentor who now stood in his way? He was a murderer. What were his instincts now that his Biju was temporarily silenced? Rivers of sand erupted from the nearby river and flew outward in every direction. They were hunting deadly prey. Taro observed the depth of control Gaara possessed over the sand. It was impressive. His crude approximation, with wind affinity chakra, was perhaps 20% of what Gaara could do. It had been good that Gaara and Number 3's battle had been, interrupted during the Chunin exam finals. Gaara's sand erupted above the tree line to the west. Number 2 ran off to confront this Chunin. Perhaps her common sense was still lacking? Number 1 began making the hand signs for one of his stronger genjutsus. Number 3 used a hand sign to question Taro. "Should I kill him?" "No," Taro signed back. "I wish to observe what Gaara will do." Number 3 hung back, hypervigilant. A few minutes later there was some kind of explosion near to where Number 2 and Gaara's sand had concentrated their efforts. Then the sand began to contract, returning to the central point where Gaara stood. Sand was wrapped around Paku like so many thick bandages. Number 2 followed behind this sand mummy. Paku was bleeding from a few wounds, signs of some of Number 2's non-lethal attacks. Gaara's sand brought his sensei to a halt a few feet from where he stood. "How did you follow me?" Paku looked more than a little terrified at being wrapped in Gaara's sand. "You are under constant surveillance, of course. I knocked my watchers unconscious before I left," Gaara said with his emotionless voice. This wasn't going to end well. But the confrontation had given Naruto all the information he needed on Gaara. The redhead's immediate instincts, without Mother whispering in his head, hadn't been to slaughter Paku. There was something to work with here. Taro interceded. Paku could be dealt with later, but Gaara's mother could choose to return at any time. "If I may, I can put this ninja into a prison of sorts. We can finish up what we came for, and Gaara can cart you back to Suna." Gaara nodded finally. Taro scrawled out a quick storage seal and then locked Paku into it. Gaara cradled it for a moment before he dropped it into his sand gourd. "Now, you, Gaara, may recline over there. This won't take too long, Taro said. Good. Wave Country was far more prosperous than it had been when Naruto first journeyed here to build a safe house. He and his team had settled on basing themselves here for their operations against Hidden Sound. The distance between the two was significant, but it was safer this way. They left on a Wednesday evening and arrived in Sound Friday at dusk. They planned to remain over the weekend, scouting out bases, trying to find where the actual hidden village was located. Kabuto was strangely unhelpful in this regard, as he had never been. Orochimaru had always come to him in order to keep his spy safe. The new line of work agreed with number one most of all. He loved the hunter nin calling. He had specifically developed his skill sets with this profession in mind. He couldn't have been more perfectly suited for this unless if he had a bloodline trait of some sort related to tracking. From Friday evening until Monday in the pre-dawn hours, the four ninja explored the flat floodplains of Rice Country. They found and destroyed a few guard posts, and took the heads of whomever they killed. They found one roving party that reminded Naruto of that raiding party with the bone wielder he'd fought and killed years earlier. This must have been one of Sound's insertion parties journeying to other countries. Their heads joined the bounty sack. Not least of all, they took action against the rice. They poisoned every field they passed. They needed to undermine Orochimaru's strength. If he held back opposition, internal and external, with the threat of his personal power and the promise of no more rice shipments, well, it helped weaken Orochimaru if he had little rice to bargain with. The guerrilla war against Hidden Sound had begun. During the morning hours of that Monday, the four of them journeyed to Lightning Country in another safe house. They'd rest up for a few days and raid again, this time cutting a swath through Rice over to Waterfall Country. Then the final leg would take everyone back to Wave for a week or more of recuperation time. They'd deal with collecting bounties listed in the bingo books then. This was how they were funding their little plan. Instead of fishing for tuna or eel, they went fishing for ninja. Chapter 16. The months after their nearly successful raising of Hidden Leaf were a bad time to belong to the Hidden Sound village. Those confined to the various hidden facilities within Rice Country or the bases hidden outside the country were safe. However, disappearances among ninja on patrol became uncountable. Production of rice dived. Terrorists were poisoning every rice field they came across. Orochimaru actually tracked their routes through Rice Country by having his ninja survey which rice fields had been poisoned, and which hadn't. Any visible structure with a remotely military purpose was torched. It was impossible to predict when or where the terrorists would strike. Orochimaru was being rapidly driven out of his mind. He had a new body, of course, but it wasn't the one he wanted. That grass ninja had destroyed his last host body. This guerrilla warfare was unlike anything that his sensei would ever approve. He'd set up ambushes, targets too good to pass up, but these terrorists never bit when Orochimaru was involved. If it was a squad of Junin, the terrorists would kill everyone without leaving any bodies or evidence behind. How could a ragtag group be this good? There was no way this was the work of the Hokage. That fool was all about protecting civilians and minimizing collateral damage. In these raids, the main starch for many, if not most, of the elemental nations was being cut to shreds. Orochimaru had depended upon the rice, upon using it as a bargaining chip to keep people from invading. He would threaten to destroy the rice, and the starving nations would relent. But his rice was gone. Terrorists. Guerrillas. Seikon, the snake Sunin yelled. His sole remaining member of the Sound Four walked cautiously into the room. My lord. We need a richer target, something that looks and smells like a trap, but is so tantalizing that these terrorists won't be able to resist. There is little left, my lord, except for our secure facilities. Orochimaru sighed. Fine, if I must sacrifice a building to kill this plague, I must. Order Structure 7 emptied. Those experiments have been performing poorly. Get our trapping experts in. We know that they like to destroy structures, so we'll counterbomb them. Anyone who sets foot in there will not be coming out again. Seikon nodded. It will be as you command, my lord. Orochimaru sat in a concrete bunker all by himself. He had a lot to consider. The terrorists, the Hidden Leaf mocking him by not being a burned ruin, but then also the last Uchiha. Orochimaru would need a new body soon, and his present vessel was less than ideal because that stupid grass ninja forced an early switch on him. He had almost 3 years before he could make the leap, but the Uchiha should be ready for recruitment now. The boy would have his uses, perhaps as a recruiting tool. Orochimaru needed more warm bodies for his ninja forces. Maybe this Sasuke would be good for something beside his eyes. Taro sat in the small cell where he'd relocated Kabuto. Jiraiya and a few other acquisitions were held in other bold holes. Naruto didn't have a safe haven like Grass Country any longer. Taro had sat in the cell with Kabuto for nearly an hour before speaking. It unnerved the former ninja. Orochimaru is taking heavy losses, Kabuto. What will he do? The spy's information was quite out of date, but the young ninja had spent a good deal of time working with Sasori and Orochimaru. He had a decent conception of what both ninja were likely to do. Taro had spent many hours posing hypotheticals to Kabuto. He will strike when you least expect. Kabuto's voice was hoarse from disuse. Taro's lips pursed. Me and my team always expect him to strike. Could you be more helpful? He will attempt to lure you into complacency. You'll blow through something and he'll just pop out and slaughter you. That's what he does best. Taro tapped his fingers on the stone floor. Traps rely on the trapped party being unaware of them. How will Orochimaru lead wary prey into a trap? Temptation. It's his hallmark. Some he tempts with offers of power, others he tempts with more unusual offerings. You who would destroy him given the chance, I believe he will try to tempt you with himself or one of his chief lieutenants. He'll spread the word that he'll be in such and such a place, and he will. But your assassination attempt will fail, and his won't. Taro laughed. You'd best hope he fails, little spy. If I die, then it will take you 2 or 3 weeks to starve to death in here. You'll never leave this place unless I personally take you out. Kabuto said nothing. Taro often taunted him like this. In truth, it terrified Kabuto whenever his captor left, and whenever he returned. He was powerless now, and this psychological torture was beginning to have its effect. Kabuto had been imprisoned for months now. Taro never beat him or threatened violence. He didn't need to. Kabuto, you've told me that Hidden Sound was conceived of as a series of hardened underground bunkers. Any ideas as to where Orochimaru might hide them? The silver-haired former ninja shook his head. I was not told precisely in case I was captured. The old snake is paranoid, but for good reason. That made sense. Orochimaru is publicly a ninja village leader in Rice Country. What percentage of Hidden Sound do you think he based elsewhere? Kabuto smiled. If I were a betting man, I'd say that Rice Country holds just a bit more than half of whatever Orochimaru built. Taro nodded. He, too, assumed Orochimaru had major bases in other countries. Did you ever learn anything about the rotation schedule? Rotation? Between the facilities. Ah, yes. I remember. Orochimaru did once explain that he rarely spent more than 2 nights in the same place before moving on. I doubt he forced all of his subordinates to follow the same rules. No, I suspect that most of the staff stays for long periods at a single facility, especially those working on Orochimaru's experiments. Too difficult to pack them up. So, it would be hard to just follow a single ninja or a group of them from facility to facility. It might have been easier prior to the invasion of Hidden Leaf, but now Orochimaru is in full paranoia. Many kilometers away in a different safe house, Naruto manipulated his Taro puppet and considered his options. Orochimaru had to go. But how? That was the question, how? Kabuto was growing less and less useful as he remained apart from his former master. It sounded cold, but Naruto was trying to think of another use for the former ninja. Something appropriate and useful. Taro led a battle group of numbers 1, 2, and 3, plus 8 more puppets controlled by Naruto from a remote location. The whole crew been extremely careful for the last 2 raids, and it saved their necks. Orochimaru had been waiting for the raiders at 2 different locations they'd tried to attack. The raiders had advanced warning each time and escaped without incident. The chakra strings connecting Naruto to his puppets were far more sensitive to foreign chakra than most ninja were. especially to a chakra that felt as foul as Orochimaru's did. Tonight, however, Taro and the entire group were returning to attack an installation they'd tried to hit once before. Naruto didn't feel any of Orochimaru's nasty chakra through his chakra strings. The team kept advancing. It was obviously a trap, but the question was the trap powered up and waiting for them this time? The entire party had brought the strongest long-range weapons they had in their arsenals. With any luck, they could lob in a devastating attack and be gone within 45 seconds. If this facility weren't so potentially dangerous, Naruto would prefer to send in spies to see if Orochimaru had left any clues to the locations of his other facilities. Given the circumstances, that was a suicide mission. Naruto couldn't risk it. Taro made the hand signals to get into position. The attack began as expected. Taro and his students hung back while the other puppets went to a mid-range position. They launched the first volley of mortar rounds. Number 3 used a wide-area steam attack to detonate the mortars above the structure. The blast and its shockwave caved in the hardened structure's roof. The other munitions would be simpler to get inside now. As numbers 1 and 2 prepared to launch a few volleys of ever-burning fluid into the gaping roof holes, Naruto felt the briefest presence of foreign chakra. He prompted Taro to withdraw everyone, but the attack was already on them. Orochimaru, who must have been suppressing his chakra for a good long while, led the attack on the mid-range attackers, all of them puppets. 3 of the 8 were cleaved in half before Naruto could respond. A few of the others were on fire. Naruto made the decision to sacrifice these puppets in order to hide the fact that they were puppets. On another part of the field, Taro and his students were fending off lesser ninja, but the numbers game was against them. They were 4 slightly surprised ninja against perhaps 20 ninja who had patiently prepared this ambush. A rain of weapons erupted from behind them. Number 3 tried to gust them away, or melt them. It mostly worked. Taro had to bat one away. Number 2 ducked and then twisted. She ran off to where the fiercest barrage of attacks came from. Taro bounded off to his left. Numbers 1 and 3 turned and began attacking the center of the field. Screams and yells told them they were hitting ninja, hitting but perhaps not disabling or killing. Naruto, back in his safe house, knew he didn't have time to be angry at this turn of events. He absolutely knew that Orochimaru was going to try something like this. He'd deferred this attack quite a few times, but Orochimaru had adjusted enough to lure them in. He just needed to keep his students safe. Then he could think about new tactics. Back on the field of battle, number 2 was engaged with 2 opposing ninja. One threw around electricity as if it were free. The other seemed to twist and twirl as if his bones were made from rubber. They were likely the most difficult opponents she'd ever faced alone. She turned to her cursed touch technique, yet another perversion of medical procedure. She managed to evade the electricity user's attack. Her fist slammed into her enemy's shoulder. Within a second, the skin blackened and began to wither. The muscle rotted before her eyes. The bone weakened and turned to dust. That ninja dropped to the ground as part of his body died. The rubber ninja did not react to his colleague's pain. Rather, he intensified his attacks on number 2. She had never seen someone move the way he did. Never. She aimed for his head and got air. She aimed for the center of his torso and the man curved away. She tried technique after technique. The ninja kept avoiding everything. Down where Orochimaru was attacking, the tide was turning against the ambushers. Naruto used his chakra strings to set these puppets into a suicide move. Only 3 were still at all mobile, but it was enough. The others still had seals inside them that could aid in this attack. 2 of the least damaged puppets jumped and grabbed at Orochimaru's guards. The puppet missing an arm locked his remaining arm around the ninja's leg. The puppet that had been heavily burned was able to get both arms around another ninja. Miles away, Naruto twitched his finger. Orochimaru's bodyguards went up in a massive explosion. All 10 of the puppet's seals detonated. Orochimaru was flung into the air, but managed to turn and right his body. He stuck to a tree with his feet rather than slamming into it. It took the snake sun in a moment to feel the pain. Then he saw that his left arm was on fire. He had a half-melted kunai stuck in his leg. He did a few quick jutsu, shook his head, and wondered what kind of ninja would do that, commit suicide like that. These terrorists got more and more interesting and irritating every time Orochimaru looked into them. In another part of the battle, number 2 dodged again as the rubber ninja went on the offensive. He had 5 kunai in his hand and was jabbing everywhere at the same time. Number 2 leapt back. The rubber ninja was gone. She pivoted to her left, and that's when she felt it. A kunai sunk into her stomach. The pain was worse than anything she'd ever felt before. As she began to fall backwards, she slashed out with her cursed touch and caught an unsuspecting rubber ninja on each leg. Number 2 saw the rapid spread of blood leaking everywhere, all over the ground. Her blood. But she had to smile. Whatever pain she felt right now was a tenth of what the other guy was feeling. A bleeding stomach, perforated intestines, a few nicked minor arteries. Her sensei would save her, or she would die. It was best to go out in battle. It was a glorious death, should Kami forsake her. In the now stilled part of the battlefield, number 3 and Taro caught up with number 1 after their attackers were incapacitated. "Where's number 2?" Taro asked. Number 1 nodded off to a section of the battlefield. Taro jumped his way through the dense vegetation. He saw his bleeding student a few moments. Miles away, Naruto positively howled in anger. He wanted to protect his students, to make them strong. He did not want them to die in such a way. Taro knelt down and scooped up number 2. She wasn't conscious. Taro hopped away. Numbers 1 and 3 looked surprised at seeing 2 so hurt. Normally she was the one who patched up their minor problems. Taro set her down and began trying to fix the wound, to see if he could stop the blood. To see if he could keep his student alive. A minute later, she was stabilized as well as could be managed. The 3 healthy ninja leapt out of their almost fatal attack site. No one spoke. They were all moving at top speed. The nearest safe house was a considerable distance away. That's it for part 2. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.